with the research project, obviously the student is at the centre of the learning. So as a student, it's up to you to decide what you want to find out and how you're going to go about finding that information out through research processes. So by research, we're not necessarily talking about pure academic, microscopes, lab coat type research here. It can be interpreted very broadly. It could be a practical type research, it could be artistic, it could be like a scientific experiment. The idea is to engage with learning to find information. So when you start your research, you will decide on a broad topic, and then you'll go through a process of refining that topic down to a researchable question. So in terms of the framework up here on the screen, you've got part one where you're initiating and planning your research. So that's when you're deciding on what you're going to do. And with the developing of the research in part two, that's when the student will actually go out and actually find the information. So they'll engage in what we call research processes. So that's activities that's going to generate information. So it could be talking to people, it could be going on the internet and searching, it could be in the library, it could be actually making something in the backyard. If you are finding something out, then you are researching for the purposes of this subject. So part two is going to be the big part. Part one is fairly straightforward. You'll decide on what you want to do. That could evolve over time. And part two, when you're developing it, that could take around a term or so of time. That could take about 8 to 10 weeks because you are finding information. Once you've found it all, you'll need to engage in a way of answering your question. So you need to present your findings. And so that's part three. And then part four is at the end, when you're looking back over the whole thing, over the whole process, the whole journey, you'll need to evaluate your learning. So you'll evaluate how you went about your research, you'll evaluate how you solved problems when they came up, because I'm sure they did come up. You'll evaluate how well you answered your question type thing. So that framework that I've just described is structured around assessment tasks. So the students will need to present 3 pieces of evidence for assessment. The first one is called a folio. Now in part one, we're working out what we're going to do and how we're going to go about it. In part two of the research framework, we've actually gone out and done it. We've developed our research. So we've found information. And all of that evidence is collected in this thing called a folio. Now this could be a massive amount of work. Okay? It could be folders and folders and folders of stuff. Or it could be much more refined. Each school will approach this differently. For our purposes, from the SACE Board's purposes, what we need at the end, when you're going to hand in your work, we need 10 pages of evidence. So it could look like something like this. So this is a collection of information that's been sifted and sorted. They've done masses of work in the background, but this is what we're handing up for assessment. This is what the teacher's going to mark. What does the future hold for Australia's Indigenous languages? And you will notice that you've got diagrams on there, you've got text, you've got information organised in sections. You've got a whole heap of information all around this topic. So if you think of the information that they found, and then the analysis of that information, the organisation of that information, how that information is sort of structured and organised for the student, that's all collected in what's called the folio. And that's where 30% of the students mark. So just like any other Year 12 subject, and all the other SACE subjects, there are performance standards, there's criteria for assessment, and the teacher needs to use that criteria to come up with a mark, and they do a great job. So we spent a term or so finding information that will help us answer our question. Now we need to sort of take out the best bits, the most important bits from that research, the pieces, and then reorder them, and use them, synthesise them to create something new. And that something new is the answer to the research question. And so the student then produces that answer in what's called a research outcome. This is worth 40%. So this is the culmination of their research. They spent a lot of time finding information, analysing it, sorting it out and all that sort of stuff. And now they're going to present their findings. So just telling us what they found out isn't enough. They need to be able to piece it all together in a way which resolves their research. In other words, they need to answer their research question, but just presenting the information isn't enough. They need to be able to tell us where they got that information from. They need to substantiate the claims that they're making. They need to substantiate their key findings. How the student does that, the format of that, is up to them. So when the subject first started, it was very safe to say, well, everyone's going to write, and that's what everyone's going to do, and that was fine, and that's still fine, that's still relevant today, and that's perfectly fine. More and more students are now being more creative in how they present their findings. They're making videos, they're presenting creative reports, creative posters, magazine articles, a whole range of different ways of showing their evidence of their learning. So this student here, she's decided to do a topic, a question around social networking affecting body image. She could have written a report, she could have done an oral presentation, she could have done a YouTube video. She's decided to present it in a way like a newspaper article. Within every single one of those paragraphs that you can sort of see up there would be 6 or 7 footnotes. 6 or 7 references to her research. So if she's making a claim that, a particular media source has this particular effect on someone, she's able to prove that through evidence through her research. This student here, they love chickens, and who doesn't? They decided to do a chicken coop. They could have done it very, straightforward sort of topic. They've had to research. They've decided to present their findings, their research outcome, in the format of a magazine. So they've taken all the photos themselves, they've researched this style of presentation, and they've put together a very high quality piece of work that answers their research question and shows where they got their information from. So if you notice at the bottom there, well, if you notice you've got features and you've got the text, and within that text there'll be a whole heap of references to information, the highlight, the blue highlight, and the footnotes, etc., etc., etc. That's where they got their evidence from. So they're substantiating their claims. Okay, so the student decides that they want to do a particular topic, they frame that into a question, they go out and they find their information, and now they're going to present their findings. We have 2 different sorts of research project. We have Research Project B, should start with A, but they do Research Project B, which is what the vast majority of students will do. 15,000 students a year will do Research Project B. About 1,500 to 2,000 students will do Research Project A. The only difference is in the external assessment. Now, the external assessment is the 3rd assessment that the students will hand up. So they'll hand up a folio, they'll hand up a research outcome, hopefully it's creative, and they'll hand up something else for their 3rd piece. In RPA, Research Project A, they'll hand up what's called a review. So essentially it's looking back on their learning, and they will tell the reader, with evidence from their research, the things that they've learned. What knowledge and skills have I learned from doing this subject? How have I solved problems while doing this subject? When I look back on my magazine article I did on my chickens, how could I make that better? What would I do differently next time? That sort of thing. They're talking about the knowledge and skills they've learned, the decisions that they made, and the quality of the research outcome. Like I said, the vast majority of students will do RPB, which is the university entrance, and what they'll do is called an evaluation. Now, they'll do a similar sort of thing to what you do in RPA, except they're evaluating how they went about finding their information. They'll evaluate their research processes. So when they decided to go and interview people, when they went and decided to survey people, when they went on the internet and found a whole heap of articles, etc., we need the student to tell us whether those activities were the best thing for them to do in their situation. So was the information they found, valid, was it reliable, was it useful, those sort of things. So the student will talk about that. The student will also talk about when they were faced with problems along the way, what they did about that, and whether those actions that they did were good or not. And then they'll talk also about the research outcome, similar to RPA, but more an evaluative type thing. This is way down the track for the students. This will be the last thing they do. The best support for the students here will be the teachers. The main message is to choose something that you love to do, make sure it's got some depth and breadth to it, and try to think about how we're going to present that information both in a folio and in a research outcome.